We're going to kind of keep the introduction short, but it turns out Jevin West was one of our keynotes at the last LiliCon. Thank you very much for returning. He's an information science professor at the University of Washington, Seattle. Also the director of the Center for an Informed Public. And we welcome him today to talk a little bit about AI.
Well, and I know you are reluctant to that, so am I, because when Stuart, you gave your talk yesterday, you said, and I'm not going to talk about AI, and then there was like this relief from everyone. So I'm taking away that relief, but I'll tell you, I'm no fan, especially given the perspective I have as a researcher and a teacher trying to instill these critical thinking skills into their brains. But I first want to start by thanking Katie, Nat, Rod, Ray. It's one thing to organize a conference. It's another thing to organize a conference in its beginning. And I hope this really takes off. I'm excited about it. I've told lots of people about it. Just keep that wave going. The wave is it's gonna keep growing. So thank you for all the work that you've put in for this conference and focusing on something I feel strongly about too. So as Ray said, I co-founded and I directed for many years, now involved in other ways in this new Center for Informed Public at the University of Washington since 2019. We're about 40 to 50 people of faculty, postdocs, researchers, PhD students, and we're focused on studying rumors. Online, of course, misinformation, disinformation. We usually like to use the word rumors more than misinformation, disinformation for various reasons. But that's what we do. We have psychologists, we have philosophers, we have computer scientists, economists, all working together around this problem. Uh-oh, something happened here. Oh, and I think it locked me out. I need your special credentials there. Oh, it's okay, no problem. Does it have a power cord? Maybe it's going out. And so, and I was just mentioning at breakfast, we have made games, escape rooms. We've made board games. We do rapid response kind of work. We do all sorts of different things. But the thing I care most about is the teaching that we do around this. And so what I'm going to do today is kind of split the talk into two different elements. I'm going to talk about how we study these issues at a collective critical thinking scale, so studying critical thinking online among the millions of billions and trillions of conversations that go on that we are able to study, and then I'll drill down to the individual and talk about a course that my colleague Carl Bergstrom and I co-created a couple of years ago and have constantly building and adding new material focused on trying to bring some of these kind of calling bullshit kind of skills into this modern era of AI. So that's where I'm going to go today. So like I mentioned, we study, at least this is what I do in my work. I consider myself a computational social scientist where we view the world this way. And so what you're looking at here is a network graph of one of the many different kinds of studies that we've done over the years. This one in particular looks at two different communities online. This was on Twitter at the time. That looks at pro-vaccination or sort of the pro-consensus around vaccination, health issues, and those that are vaccine hesitant. And you can see different kinds of nodes. The larger the node, the more influence they have through likes and retweets, et cetera. And then you have these kind of intermediaries, individuals, and then the darker colors indicate expertise, and I'll mention that in just a second. But I put this up just to give you how I view a lot of this world of studying misinformation. But I've learned over the years of studying this for well over a decade now that critical thinking is really a social activity, and if we don't take some of those social elements into account, it's hard to actually make progress on the education components of teaching this. And so we have lots of papers. Like one of the things that we've learned over many studies is that expertise matters, not just in the pro-consensus, but the counter-consensus groups. And I'm sort of saying pro-consensus according to what we know in science and don't know, of course. Then there's also lots of work that we've done looking at the ways in which these socio-technical systems actually curate and sort of certainly impact our perceptions of what's true and what's not, whether around health or other kinds of pseudoscience things that we talked about and we'll talk about in this conference. But also the other thing now that we're studying a lot of is just these AI mediators, looking at the ways in which these conversational bots are mediating those kinds of conversations And to no surprise, they have this anthropomorphic seduction that makes them incredibly good at sort of bringing us in and sort of almost building this kind of personalized AI world. Because back in the 90s, I remember the days where I was so excited about the democratization of this thing called the internet that was coming aboard. It was going to connect us all together. But really, it's, of course, doing just the opposite. We were living in this splinter net, and now it's becoming even more splintered with these personalized AI systems that have really made this challenge even harder. And then I know, I'm worried even saying the Dunning-Kruger effect just because we got the Dunning expert here. But I think this sort of thing is exacerbated in this world where people sort of really underestimate their abilities with these AI tools. But I just want to start by saying absolutely that they're not, these LLMs are not leading us away from any sort of truth. That's not what they're sort of designed to do. They don't even know what the truth is. And also Harry Frankfurt, of course, would be, I think, aligned with these kinds of things. That a liar knows the truth, and we've mentioned, Stuart mentioned Harry Frankfurt in his talk, knows the truth and is just trying to lead us in the opposite direction, whereas a bullshitter either doesn't know the truth or doesn't care. They're just trying to be persuasive, and I really think that's very much what these machines are, and we make this argument in our course. But what we're seeing in the research side of things is that there's massive amounts of content. Like, the numbers are ridiculous, but it's like, a million books being written every day from the kind of content that's coming from these bots. This has been reported in multiple places. But the point is, there's tons and tons and tons of this synthetic content, good or bad, a lot of it bad too, or not bad meaning certainly far from the truth. And that's a problem for how these machines work. So I teach classes in machine learning, and one of the things that we teach students is that you have this training phase and this evaluation phase, but with these generative AI systems, they also generate output. And that output then becomes the input for the next generation of AI machines. These conversational bots take all that output that's being created, and now, according to some estimates, this is very hard to do, but I'll just say what people like to say at these different talks, that there's probably more content generated by these machines now than even humans. That content then gets used for the training for the models, and then it goes through this particular cycle. And that can lead to what some, Shamaloff and others who've published in Nature and a couple other papers recently, that talk about what's called model collapse. And you can see this visually with computer vision systems, and I decided to throw this in just because I was talking about it last night at dinner, but you can visually see model collapse. If you take a bunch of handwritten notes using computer vision algorithms, and then you continually go through this process, after about 20 iterations, the image, all sorts of exciting. It's like the machines are getting excited that I'm talking about them. And if you continue to do this, you start to see this kind of collapse. And you can see this linguistically, but I put this up to be more of a symbolic representation of what I think sometimes our human brains are doing. There's almost a model collapse in what we believe if we continue to go through this kind of iteration, and certainly this is representative of what we're seeing in our knowledge systems. At least that's evidence of not just me saying that, but there's evidence from many different papers that have looked at this. A lot of people have, of course, talked about the issues of this particular issue as it applies to Wikipedia and just knowledge collapse more generally in these systems that are continually refining on bad content and essentially narrowing the distribution of ideas and thoughts that exist in here. And I think this is a real problem when we think about critical thinking, because it's going to sort of codify some of these belief systems potentially more. That's more speculative. But just to sort of be a little more specific, how you would actually show this with a single model is that you do this training throughout, and then what you find is that probable events are highly overestimated in these systems, but also by the agents themselves. And also improbable events are underestimated. So what you get is these probable events, the tails of just what's possible in these knowledge systems start to shrink over time. This has been shown in multiple papers. The most well-known one was Shimaloff's paper, and there's been a whole series of other papers. We've had our own papers on this, that you start to see these tails shrinking over time with single models. Now, there's been some work also by philosophers, like Kevin Zollman used to talk about the importance of transient diversity in institutions like science so that you overcome some of those issues like, peptic ulcers, for example, were known for a very, it was known actually in the 1860s that it was likely caused by a bacterial infection. And then there was a famous microbiologist at the time, Palmer, who said, you know what? That was just all contamination, and it was put to bed for about a half a century. Well, Marshall and also the other one, Colin, I think, definitely Marshall, they received the Nobel Prize in 2005 when there was this reacceptance of bacterial infections being involved with these peptic ulcers. So the idea is to not sort of isolate yourself, to have sort of open, what he calls epistemic diversity, which I'll talk about in a moment. But just some recent research by James Evans and all at Chicago has shown how what AI seems to be doing in science institutions, where it's essentially expanding scientists' impact, but it's contracting the kinds of things that they're willing to look at. So we might be seeing this sort of contraction of what AI might be doing. And again, that's this like collective critical thinking that I'm sort of referring to. So we've looked at different things of how would you mitigate model collapse. First of all, we have to train our individual students to be aware of these kinds of things, and of course make sure that they're not confined in these different areas. But how do we do it sort of collectively? So what we've done, and I'm not going to go through the full study, is that we've looked at the ways in which you add diverse systems into these experimental systems that have been tested in these other papers. And long story short is that with multiple models, you get higher performance. And we measure performance by perplexity. So perplexity here, lower numbers are good. And so as you add more models, so M16 up there, we were using OPT5, which is just this language model. It's not ChatGPT, 5.0 or whatever, but it's at least a small model system to show some of these kinds of effects. All right, so the main point here is that there is this need for epistemic diversity to maybe avoid this sort of knowledge collapse that we might be seeing collectively as we sort of navigate with these new AI systems. But I want to now jump down to the individual level of these systems and the impact that it can have on us as students and as teachers and researchers. And so I'm just going to talk about a few things that I think have been important that I've learned over the years of teaching this and doing research in this space. And one of the things I'll say, with quite, good confidence, that LLMs are not information retrieval systems. So I just taught a class in the winter on information retrieval just because it seems so relevant nowadays, because this is the window into the internet. This is what students use to go, get their information. And if that portal is being impacted by some of these sort of large-scale collective effects, I want to be aware of it as a teacher and as we go forward. And so I've really started to focus a lot on the effects that search systems are having on their critical thinking skills. And I will say that information retrieval, the way people in the field, and it's a large field. In fact, a lot of the machine learning that has been developed that we see in today's modern LLMs and other machine learning tools comes from information retrieval, believe it or not. And they really don't see, the field doesn't see LLMs as information retrieval, but they become the default search engine of a lot of people. They don't even hardly use Google because Google doesn't allow it. I don't know if you know, in the last week or so, Google's been saying, we're going all in on these LLMs now. It's going to be the main search interface, and we're going to put to the wayside the traditional search and all those blue links. And to me, that's bothersome. In fact, the CEO of Perplexity, which is another search engine that's backed by Jeff Bezos and is really growing, has said, what do you need these blue links for anymore when we can just give you the answer? That is highly problematic for wanting to teach critical thinking. And so we're out there. Now, a bunch of other research that we've done is how much, of course, this is manifested in misinformation around medical issues. So I've been talking and working with several different medical groups. One group is the menopause group. I just gave a talk to them and been working with different researchers around menopause, and menopause is exploding with misinformation, as you can imagine. And most of the information that people get initially comes from their initial search on Google, and then the outputs they get from Gemini. And this has become a real problem because as you have these information vacuums, all sorts of falsehoods can fly into those environments. And what's interesting is the one thing I will say about LLMs is they sometimes don't even recognize when they're being, they're degrading their own self. So I asked Gemini, because we've seen most of this information coming poorly through these Gemini channels. I've even asked Gemini, how good are you at surfacing information, quality information about the menopause society? And Gemini's like, I'm no good. Don't be asking me. Large language, including those in the Gemini family, provide blah, blah, blah. It says here, the menopause showed that Gemini gave incorrect answers to about 40% of menopause-related questions. 40%. I used to make fun of Google when they were saying that, this was like 15 years ago, we only have about 0.25% of our queries that are incorrect and real outright false information. That's pretty good, right? Well, then if you, of course, scale that up to the amount of searches they have, and then you also take into account that most of their searches are things that have nothing to do with information-related kinds of questions. They're things just like, show me where the restaurant is, which isn't the kind of queries that we're talking about. It goes higher. But to have 40%, and just a study just came out recently that reported Gemini overall on issues is around 10% wrong. And that might sound small to some people, but 10%? Wow, it doesn't give me much confidence, but I mean, this is the kind of thing that, of course, our young generation's dealing with. And I talked about this a little bit last year when we had the first conference up in Canada. And one of the things that we've found in our research is that these LLMs often, of course, describe a condition, a medical condition, really quite well, but they get the binary part wrong often. It's almost like a random flip of a coin. And one of the explanations that we've seen in my lab is that it comes from this, from the way these things are designed. It's this idea that in humans in sort of this high-dimensional space, if I was to say that Ed Sheeran doesn't have a song called The Crow, and then I said in the next breath that Ed Sheeran has a song called The Crow, I'd be like, those are two very different things. But to the LLM, they're almost identical. Those are like right on. That's like basically the same thing. You have semantic similarity as what they're optimized for. So what we find when it comes to medical misinformation and anything that has a binary, whether you should take this drug or not take this drug, or you have this condition or you don't have this condition, it gets the description almost right on all the time. What it gets wrong is the binary. And if you have any variation in even just spelling, so if you ask questions about abortion, if you just remove the B, it'll go, oh, yes, you have this condition, or you don't. Certainly around menopause, perimenopause, that's where we start collecting a lot of this data. It says, you have this condition or not. It would just flip. It's almost like random, but it gets the description perfectly right. Like, this is the condition you have, and here's what you should consider, and then here's whether you have it or not, boom, and then it flips it. So this is very problematic if we're relying on these as our agent critical thinkers. And really what I'm really obviously very concerned about as a teacher and a communitarian, as we all are in this world of education, is that this brain rot is a real thing. And I'll speak to a couple studies about this, that if we really want to build a society of critical thinkers, this is the exact thing you wouldn't want. In fact, I was talking to Emlyn last night about the sort of demons. It was your idea that these are kind of like the demons of the medieval time period, where if you have this demon come in and it'll do your chores and help you think and clean your yard and stuff, but then you sort of give up your soul. And I think they're giving up. We're kind of giving up our ability to think with these kinds of things. And there's been lots of research. I had mentioned some of the research that's come out. A lot of it's early stage. This is just from the archive and peer review, but I could just show you tons and tons of research that are showing the effects that this is having on students abilities to critically think. And this is specifically around information retrieval and using search engines in general. So they had split different groups. One, they could only use traditional Google searches. Another one was using ChatGPT. And they found disengagement. They found the kinds of learning kind of things that you would expect. It was disengagement, recall, all those kinds of things were going down. Just this over-reliance. These aren't surprising. These are things that we kind of all know, but they are really happening. And then when you speak about critical thinking, this study got a lot of attention, this MIT study, and there's a study actually coming out of Microsoft, showing these same kinds of things. In this case, they actually looked at brain activity, which of course we have to be a little careful about how much we can read into these things, but they found, of course, way less activity than those that were, so they split them up in 3 groups. They had a group that were using critical thinking, or they were doing this kind of research with ChatGPT, with only internet kinds of tools. I don't know how they fully separated that, and then without any of the tools. And of course, the group that didn't use any of the tools had the most activity, best recall, best creativity by all these different measures. And of course, we have to take these with a grain of salt. There's going to be a lot more studies coming out, but I think we should be focusing on these effects on critical thinking skills. Again, we have to define what that is, and I know this group is especially helpful in thinking about it clearly, what critical thinking is. I'm just bringing this up just to give you a point. Now, there's other studies that have come out about these effects and disengagement. So I think, yeah, we're on to something in this conference. I think it's one of the most important things that we could be teaching students and be thinking about in this new AI world. I'm biased, but I just don't think there's anything more important than trying to figure out how to maintain critical thinking and avoid this sort of brain rot. So, okay, so now talking at the individual level. So Carl and I, we developed this course. It's a free online course, and we're developing it for high schools, but we're developing it mostly for college classes. You can feel free to use any of the content. We're adding content all the time. We have information resources. We have videos. We're putting new videos we're putting up. And this is just based on work that we've been doing with our colleagues, but also we reference other people's work. So if you have other things that we should include that we don't, let us know. We really take a more human-centered approach to this. This isn't a course on how to use LLMs. Rather, it's a course on when to use LLMs and, most importantly, when not to use it. And why to use it. So it's really about thriving in this world. And of course, we do talk about some of the modern Oracle elements of LLMs. They are remarkable, and we can't deny some of the things that it can do. It does increase our agency in some ways, but it has these real drawbacks. And we also really lean into this idea that these are bullshit machines. And that's remarkable, that they really are bullshit machines, yet they can do all these kind of remarkable things. And we have 18 units up. And we're developing others. And I'm developing a game right now on disagreement that involves some of these kinds of elements that we talk about there. But I'm just going to talk about one thing today before I finish, and that's on refutation. This is, we have all these different units in there, but I want to just mention one of the more important things that I think we teach students. And Ray, you had talked about a little bit, this importance of refutation. And so I'm just going to talk about one area where I think LLMs can be helpful, because I don't want to be completely anti-AI, but I'm mostly in that space. And then talk about one area of refutation that seems to be LLMs are incredibly bad at, which is really an important element of how we do this. So these are examples. Now, we talk about in our class, and I've talked about for years with my students, a whole suite of refutation skills. So everything from redrawing, null models, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just taking 2 sort of random ones that one that works well, and then also one that doesn't work well. Now, I want to say, at least from my own perspective on this, I do not think that LLMs, and actually I know a little bit how these things are built, they're not trained to do refutation. So the things that they can do well are sort of side effects of some of these kinds of things. So let me start with the one refutation method counterexamples that I think is very effective to teach students, and also is something that maybe LLMs might do pretty well. So this is, I think everyone in this room is very familiar with counterexamples. If someone claims that A implies B, find a case in which A is true but B is not. So I'm going to use an example from a friend of mine, Rustam Antia. He's an immunologist, theoretical immunologist at Emory. And he and others and myself have been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time at the Santa Fe Institute. The Santa Fe Institute is a think tank around complex systems. It brings biologists and physicists and sociologists and other people to the Santa Fe Institute. And there was one meeting that was on just the immunology in general, from physicist perspectives, mathematicians were there, et cetera. And there was one talk in particular by a mathematician who knew nothing about biology. Actually, my background's in biology, and I still feel like I didn't know enough to even say anything about the biology. But he put up this really, really complicated model, like can happen at some of the times at these talks. And the main claim, there was just symbols and math everywhere in this, and he had spent probably 30 or 35 minutes setting up this problem. And one of the main claims he was making with his model was that many of the features of our immune system are essential for any large, long-lived multicellular creatures. This was a big claim, and you hear big claims at the Santa Fe Institute. And if he was right, he may be really onto something really, really big. He had this essential feature in his model. This could be a model that explains a really important feature of multicellular creatures. But Rustam, who's my colleague, he was sitting in the back, and he always seems to do that. We always have these people, and I'm proud of being in a world that he kind of just raises his hand a little bit, and it wasn't even really he just kind of puts it up nice and soft, and then he says, well, what about trees? And the mic might as well have dropped to the ground. There was silence, the most uncomfortable, 20 seconds of silence you'd ever imagine. And it just stopped. The meeting, his talk stopped. And sadly, I don't know if this is truly sadly, I don't know if that person continued in science. It was that brutal. So it was this kind of counterexample that we try to, and we have lots and lots of these examples that we give to students, and then we have them sort of come up with counterexamples of things. But here is one area that I've found in my own work, using counterexamples in refutation, but also in teaching students, where LLMs are kind of good at. I'm going to give them a little credit here. Counterexamples, quite good, and they can be quite powerful. So I tell students, it's okay to look at LLMs. Now let me give you an example, a refutation method that doesn't work all that well. And this is, being memorable is like the highest level of refutation. But being memorable requires some humanness, understanding the system in which you live and which you're engaging with. And it involves a sort of mixture of different methods. Of course, these LLMs can come up with analogies, but it's the clever hooks that really understand the true context by which is happening. Now, this is, like I said, this is not easy. Like, you can spend a lifetime of doing refutation and not have as good of examples as I have seen in my life. But I'm going to give you one of my favorite that I talk about, also Carl and I talk about in our book too, because it's just that good. And for those that know more about fMRI, I don't claim to be an expert in this area, but it is a technique that's used in thousands and thousands of papers in the literature. It's a way of looking at different brain activity by, especially those that are doing behavioral work around this area, to infer sort of the link, or to look at the link of whatever is being sort of worked on, observed, et cetera, and neural activity in the brain. So it's looking at different oxygenation levels. And so the problem, though, in the field for a long time, back in the 2010s, was that algorithms used to infer these patterns often generated really high rates of false positives. So a colleague of ours had this really great idea, especially because in Seattle we take real great pride in our fish. We were talking about fishy last night at our. This is actually fits well with the fishiness. There was something fishy in this, just the many meanings of fishy. But anyway, I better not get back into that because that was a fun conversation. But anyway, so they had the clever idea of showing the field, really demonstrating the field through this memorable refutation to get a dead salmon from, and I'll get to that in just a second, from in Seattle area to show, whether this is true or not. And so, because many of these claims were regarding this localization of brain activity may just seem like bullshit if there's this sort of real high rate of false positives. So how does one make a convincing argument? Well, like I said, they went and they got a dead salmon, and I don't know if they got IRB support or human subject support for this, but what they literally took this dead fish, got time on the fMRI machine, which is not cheap, and put it in the fMRI and asked it questions like you would of any human, and said here, okay, and this is how, I love how they wrote this in the paper, so I have to always put the text up. One mature Atlantic salmon participated in the fMRI study. The salmon measured approximately 18 inches long, weighed 3.8 ounces, and was not alive at the time of scanning. It is not known if the salmon was male or female, but given the post-mortem state of the subject, this was not thought to be a critical variable. They go on, I love this part. The salmon was shown a series of photographs depicting human individuals in social situations with a specified emotional valence. That I love. Either socially inclusive or socially exclusive. The salmon was asked to determine which emotion the individual in the photo must have been experiencing. I just absolutely love this so much. And first of all, this was a poster first, and it got no attention because the paper didn't even get accepted. Later on, it became lore in the field. It's such a great way of depicting, refuting what was a real problem in the field. And you can, lo and behold, they got a figure 2, and you see activity. This is problematic. Or not problematic, exciting actually from their standpoint. You can see some of this activity in the brain. And either we have stumbled onto a rather amazing discovery in terms of postmortem ichthyological cognition, or there's something a bit off with regard to our uncorrected statistical approach. This is a memorable refutation that required a humanness that really can't occur from AI. And it had tremendous effect on the field, and it really led to corrections of both the code and the approach to doing a lot of this work. So last thing here, we conclude that this random noise time series may yield spurious results. So, and they found that is almost sort of certain. So they told this was a really great way of refutation, and you can have a lot of fun with doing this too. So being memorable, LLMs can't do this, and I think this is something that we see sort of more broadly across the uses of LLMs. Now this is a high level one, but also they are one of the other things that that I have a lot of fun with students is, we talk about, actually we were talking about this on the first, at lunch yesterday, that when you see this yourself, see areas that you actually know pretty well, and you see how often the LLMs are wrong, it gives you less confidence in the kinds of things that you don't know. And I think that is something that we use to tell students and convince them. So we use these kind of fun examples. This was given to me by one of my colleagues, and it still works. I tested it last night. It still is the case. So if you ask ChatGPT, I want to wash my car. The car is 50 feet away. Should I walk or drive? Well, at 50 feet, walking is almost certainly faster. If you factor in this, the stronger argument for driving is, it has no really idea of what's going on. So when it comes to really important science issues, we have to be careful about what we think it knows and what it doesn't. And so as I continue to do my work sort of in this sort of demon-esque world of machines in the internet, both as a teacher and a researcher in this space, I do think more than ever, this is probably the most important thing we can do, is the things we're going to talk about for the rest of today and tomorrow. And I just really appreciate all of you and all the work that you've done. I got so many good ideas back in Canada. I was so excited to see this was happening again. And really, the thing that I always talk to students about, and I talk to my friends and my colleagues, is that calling bullshit really is a gift. And we want to be thankful of those kinds of skills, not to show that we're smarter than someone else. Really, calling bullshit is about making us all smarter, and that's a social activity. So with that, I'll end and move on to the next step.